Hi, everybody. It's Alan Morrison again with another issue of the GraphRAG Curator podcast. And I'm delighted to have with us today Bob DuCharme, who's been in semantics technology for many years. And you follow his blog at bobdc.com. He's been blogging there for years, and he's always such a clear writer. He's just a pleasure to read. Bob's behind a book on Sparkle that is another real model of clarity. So I'm happy to have Bob on with us, and we're going to talk about working inside companies and helping them understand and adopt semantic technology. So welcome, Bob.
Well, thanks, Alan, and thanks for your kind words.
Yeah, and I always start with a question about your background and how you got interested in this stuff, because it's not obvious sometimes how people get started.
Well, years ago, I had a tech writer role at a software company in New York City. We may have even been using dedicated wangs or something at that point. But we started to learn more about SGML, structured ways to store documents as structures, but non-proprietary, so that you can easily turn them into other things.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going to SGML conferences and so forth, getting to know the key people. And then some of those key people thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a simplified version of SGML? And first they called it WebSGML, which then they thought of a catchier name, XML. And that's where XML came from. And so I found myself at a consulting firm and also companies like Moody's Investor Service and LexisNexis, helping them transition to and take advantage of XML. I've always said I'm interested in data that doesn't fit neatly into tables. So XML for tree structures, and then for better or worse, the RDF effort grew out of the XML. It was very helpful when they jettisoned the XML part. A lot of that work came out of there, and I thought with RDF, the flexibility, but the simplicity, and as more and more commercial and open source implementations were out there to play with, we started playing with them and doing more things. And so I even in my personal blog, I had written about some cool features of GraphDB even before I was an employee of the company. And I heard they were having some of their employees read my book, so that was nice too. So it's great to things that with my blog, things that I was doing for fun and writing about, to now have a job at one of the key companies doing that sort of thing and doing it for a living.
Absolutely. And you mentioned XML, and it's still being used in some areas. And I think immediately of Michael Iantoska of Avalara and what he's doing with Data. And so can you sort of give us a take on how these vestiges of XML are still around and people are still using them to benefit?
Yeah, one of the good news and the bad news with XML when it first became big during the .com boom, and there were these companies trying to figure out how can we send data, seamless e-commerce from one company to another, but that didn't necessarily fit into tables. So there was this new standard XML, and there were parsers. So they started using that to send transaction data, and then a lot of these people started to complain, like XML was badly designed. It's like, well, it wasn't designed for what you guys are doing with it. So eventually JSON started doing that sort of thing. But XML was originally designed for electronic publishing, to store content that can then easily be converted to multiple different formats as they come up. And the DTD, or the schema for a document class, there are various specialized ones, but two of the big ones are Data and DocBook. Like DocBook, O'Reilly. In fact, I wrote my Sparkle book using Data, but then O'Reilly preferred DocBook because they were one of the original companies behind that. So I just wrote some XSLT to convert it. These were designed to be flexible structures for publishing, but also to have lots of metadata. There's lots of slots for metadata to help you, because I'll say it. I said it before, I'll say it again. The whole point of metadata is to get more value out of your data, right? So there were lots of slots for metadata in the popular, successful schemas like DocBook and Data. And I think what Michael and Ian Tosker are doing is taking advantage of those slots, not only to put descriptive terms, but by plugging that into curated taxonomies, managed metadata, so that you can manage at an even more granular level, not just documents, but down to the paragraph level if you want it. So that's the relationship I see between, well, the RDF can be stored in there as well, or just the keywords, but lots of flexibility in how you store metadata and take advantage of its relationship to the data that it's about.
Yeah, and I'm sort of thinking when you're talking about others who are in this hybrid world that GraphWise, for example, occupies, where you've got the so-called symbolic knowledge representation and the semantic metadata. And then you've got the probabilistic methods that data scientists and engineers are familiar with. And you've got vector embeddings, for example, in the mix. So and it seems like we've had a kind of a monolithic approach to AI in much of what's happened over the past, say, 5 years, and particularly the case with generative AI, that the data science teams don't seem to be that aware of semantic metadata and the value of it, and so I'm wondering, Michael's an example of somebody who's been on both sides of this, and he's putting these things together. Can you help us understand how these things are coming together to the extent that they are? How are we working with data science teams that might have things in tensors, and they might have been stripping out the context of the data before they even start with training a data set?
Well, I think, we can think in terms of toolbox, right? There are these various tools, and you can pick out the first, fourth, fifth, and seventh tools in your box to do. Maybe you need one, maybe it turns out the fifth one wasn't what you wanted.
Yeah.
But with things like vector embeddings, I mean, I'm trying to avoid even using the term AI anymore, because it has meant so many different things over the years.
Yeah.
And pursuant to your point, though, what it often meant 5 years ago was machine learning with neural networks, deep learning, weighted to create vectors to help show similarity with cosine similarity or something like that. When people said AI 5 or 6 years ago, I think that's pretty much what they made. And then one particular application of that to analyze, people were analyzing, and still are, chest X-rays or the path of boats on the water. But to analyze just all the English available on the web, to the model there, very large model, large language model. And nowadays when people say AI, they mean the use of these large language models that have been created.
Right.
I think for people like data scientists, they want the data that's going to help them solve their problem. Managing the data more long term, I think, as far as I know, is typically less of an issue with data scientists. And it's that management, a database, a database manager. If you're going to store data and try to get more different kinds of value of that data over time, you want to store it in an organized way and store it with some metadata, because the metadata will help you get more value out of it, to navigate and find what you need, to track provenance, and all the good things we've seen. I think with data scientists, these things are less of an issue. They have a specific problem to solve, and so they're going to get the data to do it, and then maybe move on, or maybe that is, maybe build a database. Yeah, I'm not sure if that addresses what you're.
Yeah, well,
part of what you asked.
It seems that the method of the standard database query and retrieval has been somehow adjacent to, but not part of, what the data scientists are doing to train data. How are they bringing the data sets together? Should they be doing it in a different way to get the richer relationships in the data? How would we change the processes to make this more of a smooth and holistic, cohesive operation?
Well, I think, like I said about picking out the first, fourth, and fifth tools in the toolbox. It depends on your goal. You know, if I was a sales guy and someone was asking me about that, I would say, well, what are you trying to do? You know, what is it that you're trying to, and oh, maybe the second and the fourth and fifth tool here are what we want. I mean, one of the advantages of the merger of OntoText and Semantic Web Company into GraphWise is bringing together a wide selection of tools. The PoolParty taxonomy and ontology manager to help curate standards-based metadata of taxonomies and thesauruses. And also they have many, as did on OntoText, many tools for analyzing, say, PDFs, text, and pulling out facts in the form of triples. So these are just some of the tools that can be combined. Now, I mentioned GraphDB, OntoText triple store graph database manager is where, when you put all these various things together, that can sort of hold them together to build an application where you can store the data. It can be in clusters, it can be distributed to take advantage of all these different tools. But to have all these different tools and then pick, like with vectors, there's with the full text search, you know, or finding concepts in there as identified by the kind of machine learning we were discussing. All of these different things are options that can be combined different ways into, you know, what we call the GraphWise, the Graph AI suite. But there are other subsets of that as well that may meet certain customers' needs. But, you know, getting back to what are you trying to do for a given customer? How can we help? And to start, another thing I like in particular about an RDF-based approach, that it makes it a lot easier to start small and gradually build up from there. Like one of the things when people talk about RDF schema, so many, you know, defining the structure of a set of data. Many systems you have to have a whole schema, you know, figure out all your classes and all your properties and all the relationships before you even input, you know, the first record. Other systems are proud, oh, no schema, it's schemaless, it's so flexible. Like with XML, it's either all complete schema or no schema. But with RDF, you can have a complete schema, you can have no schema, and you can have a partial schema. You can just, you know, if you're integrating some data, just describe a little bit of it in your schema, build a little application, takes advantage of it, prove the value, and add a little more to your schema to take advantage of a little more of that. So that kind of flexibility to iteratively build from a proof of concept to a robust enterprise application, that's another thing I like about how all of the RDF-based tools fit together.
Yeah. And so once you've done that, once you've done a POC and you're impressed with the results, the validation part of it comes into play as well. And it's sort of like you want to check after yourself to make sure you're doing things in the most beneficial way that you can, and it's actually working and doing what you thought you were doing. How does that happen?
Well, one of the things that, you know, in the early days of semantic web that kind of scared people off was the web ontology language, or OWL, which built on a lot of research in the knowledge representation world, provided ways to do all kinds of complex inferencing, which is cool. You know, we're coming up with new facts here, we're inferring them, but it was a lot of work for the computer, for the an OWL system to do that. And a lot of people saw, oh, OWL let me say that an employee is a subclass of person, and an employee has to have a given name and a family name and a start date or whatever, you know, a schema. But OWL actually didn't really do that. It let you infer things, and it was looking at it from a different angle, and so that was kind of off-putting to people, this very complicated thing that didn't let them do certain basics. So over time, the new W3C standard to help with all this, called Shackle, SHACL, but a pun on shackles that, you know, hold people or hold things, was developed to give people a very simple way to say, a family name and given name are required, and hire date are required fields, and start date has to be in this range, or a given value has to match this regular expression, or this value has to be between this number and this number. So Shackle is part of the family of standards. And with a shackled processor, and of course that's built into GraphDB, I also like how you define the rules with triples in RDF. And if you say, does this data set meet these rules, whether it does or it doesn't, the response is in triples. It's in RDF, which means it's easier to fit that data checking into a pipeline. So when you're, as I get back to this, gathering all these tools together to meet certain needs, Shackle can fit into a pipeline to read from one process and feed to another, or maybe a separate process if there were errors. So Shackle really has met a lot of needs, and I think a lot of people have found that to replace what they were originally unable to get out of OWL.
Makes sense. And I know that people like Jessica Talisman, for example, advocate starting with something other than OWL. If you're just getting started, SCOS, for example, is something that Semantic Web Company and now GraphWise recommends people starting with for starters. It's also the case that when I look at the capabilities of the stack as it exists now, it's what I'm really impressed by is the fact that you get all of this heterogeneous, different kinds of data together in this graph form, where it's all accessible, and it could be fair information that's in there that can be reused. And so there's so many different challenges that can be addressed with this technology, and I try to get people interested in exploring the different, all the different use cases. You know what I'm saying? And so, I mean, one of the things that Semantic Arts talks about, Dave McComb, is, well, you don't really need to have all this code in the applications. You could take most of the declarations in these applications and just put it in the graph. You talked about rules being in the graph. Dave makes the assertion in his books, maybe you could get rid of 85% of the data in the applications and just slim your apps down to 15%. I'm thinking that's in an agent-based environment, that's the same case, right? A lot of this could end up in the graph where it's more manageable to begin with. Am I wrong about this?
Sure. I mean, I think the ease of management of it gets back to, good, quality metadata. Good, and there are ways, it's part of the fun that LLMs can help generate that sort of thing. But to have good metadata, and that's why, like the graph modeling parts of GraphWise, GraphWise within the GraphWise platform, to build the models to represent what you have so that people can take advantage of the relationships better. Just, to say, oh, this is a subclass of this. So whenever you have an employee, it's actually a person too. I mean, that's a very simple example, but to go even further, because that's, that is the nice thing about schemas. They give you structure. You look over the structure before you look at the data and you get some idea of what's trying to be done. And so I think the quality metadata of which schemas are part of that metadata is important to navigate that.
Yeah. So what kinds of use cases excite you? I mean, when you're doing your work, can you give us an example of the kinds of things that people are working on specifically to solve a problem, and where's this technology becoming really useful that it hasn't been in the past, for example?
Things like you mentioned, Michael Ian Tosca, the work they're doing. There are various NGOs doing really interesting stuff with, they have taxonomies. They've always, a lot of these organizations have had them for years, but they're able to do more things with them. Instead of just having an official list of terms to use, to have, when their storage conforms to standards like SCOS, it can then plug into more applications that can do more things with it and help them get more out of their data. I mentioned earlier the value of, for any given project to start really small and scale up from there. And that's why I've always tried in my blog, just tiny little examples to build up from. But I mean, I'm trying to think of some of our other customers. Yeah, those agencies.
let's think about Michael for a minute. People may not be familiar with what he's doing at Avalara. I know that he has this platform that he's got together, and Avalara does. It's a huge resource for state tax information. And so I'm not clear on how the platform is related now to what Avalara does commercially. Is it still in R&D land, or is it commercial? Do you know?
I think it's commercial. I mean, with not all 50 states, but it provides another good example of the technology I mentioned. You know, you take information that is in, you know, tech PDFs or whatever, but just narrative text of paragraphs and paragraphs, and tax code and treasury regulations, things like that certainly count. But they do have a, you know, more in the XML sense, they do have a very specific structure as far as what pieces have to come in what order and the relationships. So to take advantage of that structure, and then the, you know, entity extraction to know when the, you know, the term Charles Schwab is referring to the company versus the guy, or what things are related to other things, to pull that out of a set of documents and then encode that as triples, as RDF, so that you can do the kind of querying, whether with a Sparkle query language or the natural language querying that we, you know, as more of our talk to your graph and various other things support. So pulling information out of those documents and then making that part of the knowledge graph lets them do more things with the knowledge graph, as opposed to just doing a full text search of, all right, here's a document, let's see if it mentions, you know, I was going to say deductions, of course it will if it's tax, but a specific kind of deduction, or, you know, a yacht. You know, let's search these documents for the word yacht. To have a more structured search, because we're getting some structure by pulling things out that conform to a certain ontology, and we can take advantage of that. Either with, like I said, Sparkle queries or natural language queries, or from another application that is reading this and has its own front end to what its users see. So it's not all just about people using it directly, but to power other applications that people can then build on. And that's why these products all have APIs too, so that people can build entirely new products and tools for use by people who may not know that it comes from GraphWise.
Right. And it seems like it's getting more and more possible for the interface to provide some level of automation. You mentioned talk to your graph, and it's TTYG is generating Sparkle queries, correct?
Often, I mean, I think it's, when you ask it a question, it gives you a response. You can even say, you know, how did you get that response? It can show you this query. It might have been a full text search to look for things. I did a demo that's on our website where I found a great, I think it was called dummyjson.com or .org. It's fake data, but it was for sort of an online company selling watches and furniture, and there were ratings and all that, and it was all free fake data. So I did a video called "Build a Shopping Chatbot in 4 minutes," and I walked through one. That's already a repo. No, I think I even had the creation of the repo. I created an RDF version of that data. So then I pulled it into a GraphDB repository, and then did the configuration so that I could do full text search, show me all the watches where the average rating is higher than 3. This is in plain English. I would type that out.
Right.
You know, and then I could say, show me the Sparkle query that you did that, but it was, you know, a toy example of a real world problem to a shopping chatbot.
Yeah. I watched the TTYG webinar recently that Andreas did, and there was a snippet of video from Semantic Partners where they were talking about the different classes of search that you could specify. So you could do, for example, you know, like the graph query. You could also do similarity search, for example. And is it essential that you specify that sort of thing up front with TTYG, so that the the mechanism that you're using knows where you want to go to retrieve the information that you're looking for?
Not necessarily. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know that when you create a new repository, you tell GraphDB, I'm creating a new repository. So you give it the name and so forth, whether you want to do any kind of what inferencing profile you may be doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the checkboxes is enable full text search, and I always just check it. But the TTYG can really take advantage of that.
Oh, okay.
The full text search, so
Mm-hmm.
which also hooks in with some of the connectors that GraphDB has for Elasticsearch and Lucene and some of the others, that those can be used to do. Those contain some Lucene-based searches of I think I did a blog entry or a video of that, so that Lucene can be used to do, take advantage, find this word within 3 words of that word. It can search the GraphDB data.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a nice example of using another tool with a different focus on the same data, another tool in the toolbox, tool number 11 and 12, Lucene and others. And I believe
Yeah.
with Lucene support, it's built in, and some of the other full text ones require another license. I forget,
Yeah.
but it's more tools to pick from to do more cool stuff with the data.
Right. Right. Exactly. So when you bring agents into the mix, how are companies doing that most effectively, considering this kind of platform? And I'm thinking in particular about sidestepping the risks that are associated with agents that might get into trouble if they're not guided in the right way, or they may be given too much autonomy to begin with, given the circumstance. Are you seeing a lot of that activity, because there's such a buzz about it right now?
There is. I also think I saw an article recently where they quoted some, I guess, artificial intelligence researchers saying, oh, when it figures all of the stuff and it might be wrong, and there's no human in the loop. And it made me think, this must be from some researcher, because it seems like part of the buzz is so many companies are saying, and we can do human in the loop, right? We're happy to add that into the system. Please give us money. And along with the human in the loop, I think with GraphRAG, that if you're going to ask an LLM a question, so we have this opportunity to say, and here's some extra data,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. LLM, maybe that helps. Now, if you gave it a bunch of PDFs, or even, all right, that's too big. Well, we'll split the PDFs into chunks. And even that, it's still not. So what we're finding, of all the various ways to provide data to the LLM via GraphRAG, a knowledge graph, RDF of data with structure, and because they understand the structure. I mean, I've had fun just doing ChatGPT,
Yeah.
saying, show me the turtle results. If I had this RDF data and sent it a Sparkle query that did this kind of thing, what would the result look like? And it does it. So
Mm-hmm.
handing it maybe an RDFS or OWL and some data that goes with it, all that's relevant to what you're going to ask. It's important. And this assumes we're talking about companies with a specialty and their special data that helps people do jobs in their domain better. For a company like that to work with one of the LLMs and provide their own data as a graph, the graphs just seem to do better than chunking in some of these, and vectors and some of the others. So that's one way to really help it give more sensible answers. And human in the loop, and to make it iterative as well. That's one thing I
Yeah.
like with LLMs. If I enter a question, I don't really like the answer, I can say why I don't like the answer and give me another one. But providing this data that helps with the guardrails a lot. They can be the guardrails in many cases. Data to say more background, potential things that might need to be disambiguated, and things like that. You just tell it up front in a structured way. It's going to understand better than your own natural language sentences.
Yeah. I think I saw you post something related to the Adam Kimball interview that I did not too long ago, and Adam was talking about this kind of a feedback loop again, and recursion, as I recall. But it seems like the feedback mechanisms need to be in more places inside organizations. And it's like, once you get this thing going where you've got the machine learning capability and it's learning and perceiving and it's like you could set this up in every department in a company so that you have that human from that department in the loop providing that specific information that department needs, and just sort of refining it in this iterative process. I mean, I'm surprised that companies aren't talking about this more.
Well, it's like I said earlier, it was kind of fun for me the first time I saw that something like ChatGPT could just give you triples,
Yeah.
syntactically correct triples. So if you add those back into our knowledge graph as part of a workflow that has someone review it to see, because the person who reviews might have ideas, yeah, this information added was pretty good, but it could be better. Well, that can lead to tweaking the model so that it is better. And so, not just a thumbs up or thumbs down, but this human in the loop can take part in tuning so that it gives even better information.
Yeah, for sure. So it just seems like there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, and where are you seeing people use the kinds of standards that we've talked about more often? What are you seeing from your vantage point?
I think all the ones we discussed, I mean, of course, Shackle, I don't see as much awareness of RDFS as I'd like to. I mean, look at schema.org. Schema.org is RDFS because, like I said, for years, people were put off by OWL. It's too complicated. It's like, well, here's a simpler version that can really do basic modeling that anyone who's modeled any data with any other can get used to. So it's nice, hopefully, to see more of that. Of the tools, of the standards-based tools, I mean, that and Shackle, the modeling, and then SCOS, of course, has always been popular, but is getting more popular because as people can take more, where a taxonomy or a thesaurus may have just been a list of words before, now it's something that can be plugged into a system and really help that system. So that's really helping with SCOS, people using more of that. So yeah, SCOS, Shackle, RDFS, RDF itself. I'll probably kick myself later for forgetting some, but
well, Tony Seal, I interviewed him for the podcast. Tony talked when he was at UBS about using schema.org inside of UBS to get people on board with it, and just it seemed like a good starting point from their perspective, something that wasn't too intimidating to begin with.
It's nice, and you can prove the value, of the disambiguation. All right, if I'm going to have an employee, but I need to represent that as a URI, I could have my company's domain.com/employee, but my data is going to be much more interoperable with other data if I go with the scheme.org version of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And that interoperability, that ability to plug, I mean, that's one of the great things about RDF. When people do use common, well-published URIs to represent basic things, the more people are using, there's a network effect that makes more data easier to plug in with other data and to integrate within, a growing knowledge graph that has more and more stuff.
You can just disambiguate with the help of these external resources that you're pointing to.
Yeah.
And it seems like many will be familiar with schema.org for website optimization to begin with. And then you just use its adjacent cousins, I guess, if you will, to sort of expand the use of the same methodology. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think by cousins or children, there are people who've taken schema.org and then made subclasses, but made that available for other people. I think the IPTC did for sport. I think that's where they came up with their sports schemas to
Mhm.
represent data from everything from, a basketball game to tennis to Formula One racing.
Yeah.
So they made a sort of standard based on that standard that they encourage other people to A, have input on, and then B, share and use. So it's really grown beyond just the classes and properties that you see defined on the schema.org website.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were talking about sports, and I was thinking about other endeavors. And you're a music aficionado. You're a jazz bassist. Have you seen a lot of this kind of thing in the what used to be called the music industry? I mean, Music Brains, for example, decades ago, it seems like, was sort of an example of early semantics technology and the application of it. Are you seeing anything today that's music related that would be interested? Because I play around with the guitar. I studied piano growing up, so I'd just be curious.
There's Wikidata.
Yeah,
There was some database of Miles Davis related stuff that was available in RDF. And there's some jazz ones out there, but it's
yeah,
more for like record collectors and like who played bass on this album in 1952 kind of things.
yeah, yeah,
I had fun. There's a website called BeatlesBible.com or .org,
yeah.
which lists pretty much everyone who played every instrument on every Beatles song. And they listed it in such a regular way. It was all, natural language English, but
Yeah,
with some colons and semicolons or whatever, but all was so regular that I thought I can just turn this into RDF.
yeah,
So I wrote a script to turn it all into RDF, and it was so much fun to ask questions that, people have maybe never, who played piano more than anyone else? It turns out, I think Paul and then George Martin. But all the Beatles played piano on one song, or not. You can. Where did Ringo play piano? Oh, here. I'm just doing all that with Sparkle queries. I should really put that in a talk to your graph. Do it with natural language. So
wow,
how many songs does Eric Clapton play? Oh, two. While my guitar gently weeps, and what else? Oh, like All You Need Is Love, when they had all their friends in the background singing.
yeah,
Yeah, they got credit for that. That's not really, but that was a fun bit of data. And I once, several years ago, had some fun with someone had written a library to convert round trip RDF to MIDI, MIDI for encoding music to
right,
RDF and back. So I thought, well, I could write some RDF, convert it to MIDI, and then hear it played. So what I did a couple little things, but I did one, a little sort of jazz one where there are three instruments. There was a ride cymbal just going, then a bass playing fairly random quarter notes within certain parameters, either stepwise or thirds, but
yeah,
otherwise random, boom, 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 and then a muted trumpet, because with cheap MIDI, regular trumpet and regular sax, they just sound like cheap keyboards.
right.
Muted trumpet's a little better. Picking random notes too, but with like sort of bebop soloing kind of rhythms, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, it gets boring after 2 minutes, I will admit, but when to generate RDF to then generate music, that was kind of fun.
Yeah, you made me think of one of my favorite recordings is James P. Johnson's 1925 piano roll of Charleston. And I was just amazing that in 1925, I mean, a lot of the
Yeah,
liveliness of the way he played comes through on the
yeah,
piano roll. So what you're talking about is like, okay, we're just trying to do this through MIDI now,
yeah.
um, with all sorts of different instruments and all sorts of different tonalities. So
There's a one set of music, people call it black MIDI, where they'll generate a MIDI file that's just so incredibly dense that if you did show it on a regular score, the page would be pretty much black. And it's obviously something that people can't play, but you can generate it if you use good, samples of a nice piano. You
yeah,
can hear it back. And so it's more about, I imagine, coming up with algorithms to populate these MIDI files and then to listen back. I think it's sort of like algorithmic composition, I guess.
yeah,
One story I was going to tell about James P. Johnson, my mother once said that her dad, who was into jazz, had these old 78s. She said, and his name was Johnson. And as a young guitar player listening to a
Yeah.
lot of like Eric Clapton and people like that, I was like, was it Robert Johnson? Was it Robert Johnson? He said, I think there was a lot of piano. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, probably James P. Johnson. That that would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what are you listening to lately? In terms of the music, are you performing regularly as a bassist? Or are
Actually,
you
I've got
part of
a.
a combo or something?
I was for a while when I when I was young. I played loud rock guitar, lead guitar in bands in New York, trying to get signed. And then we moved to Charlottesville. I played little electric bass. When we moved here, I thought, oh, it'd be fun to play upright bass. It's tougher if you're in a New York apartment. So I learned, and I ended up playing in like sort of the local minor league here, playing this Italian restaurant every Wednesday night as background music. And then a friend told me about a local community orchestra that was so desperate for bass players they would probably take me. And I had never really played classical music. I might listen to a lot, but so, and I had worked in my bowing and my reading a little more than some jazz beginners. So I went and they didn't kick me out. And pretty soon I was playing bass like Beethoven's Fifth and Ninth. And then I thought, well, I always had this fantasy of writing string quartets. So I switched to viola, and I've actually got a gig this Saturday afternoon with another community orchestra playing viola. So, and a lot of what I listen to, like on Bandcamp, they have a great you can tag. Here's one of the perils of metadata. Some of these websites where you can add your own tags to your own stuff, and
Yeah.
people will say this is classical music when they're just rambling up and down the white keys, maybe after a few bong hits, and it's it's pretty boring. But they have this every month, every other month, this one music writer who picks out the best of what they call contemporary classical, like interesting new stuff, and he'll write a little essay and have links to it. And I've even sent him some fan mail thanking him for doing this, because trusting, I guess it's a good lesson in trusting the automation of assigning metadata, or trusting people to add their own, the downsides of that. So curated by a real person with a point of view to say, here's the good new stuff to listen to this month. That's best contemporary classical. I can't remember. But that has guided a lot of my listening, and then I hear certain people and go listen to their whole album on Bandcamp.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just talking about the governing the metadata, and if you could make an organizational change, if there was some really common issue across companies that you knew you could change, what would you change to help us out with the governance problem that we have with data?
It might be a cop-out, but I'd have to go back to what I said before. For any given company, like, what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
And then I would strongly encourage them to use standards. If they use schema.org, then it does interoperate with what the others are doing. But several years ago, when I worked at a company who had a taxonomy manager, and I got to go to the taxonomy bootcamp conference in Washington that's every year. And I learned a lot more about the taxonomy world. One thing I learned was that many people with library science degrees, or as we would say now, information school degrees, they became full-time taxonomists, and their job would be to go to a big company where, let's say there's a meeting in the company and you have a certain project, and I say, Alan, that project you're working on, like 3 years ago, this guy who used to work here, he wrote a report. I think that would be really useful for you. How are you supposed to find that report, that PDF? Well, the full-time taxonomist, it's their job to get people to assign the metadata so that you can find that. That's the work that so many of these people are doing, organizing the taxonomies and the assignment of metadata. But I heard stories at the conference where people just wouldn't add metadata. Okay, we'll make it required. You have to add at least one keyword. Everyone would add the keyword aardvark because alphabetically it was the first thing on the list, right? And obviously that doesn't help. So that was really interesting, hearing about full-time taxonomists describing their challenges and success stories of managing metadata. So I learned a lot from them, and it's interesting to work with people like that again. So I'm sorry if that was kind of a cop-out to your question, but a single thing,
I was just thinking about role changes. For example, I was thinking about, okay, how do we get people to collaborate better? Because there are obviously people in organizations who are more attuned to the metadata side of things, and they like working with it. My mom was a librarian. She loved cataloging. She loved classifying things. those people could be a lot better utilized in a big organization if they weren't so siloed in departments. And that's sort of my dream, is that, you've got this little AI team over here doing all these things, and they think they have to do everything themselves. They don't have to do everything themselves. They've got all these other resources. They need to know how to tap into them. So there's like a metadata sort of structure, a schema of sorts to help them navigate their own organization. I used to do that at PwC. How do you navigate this organization informally to get to the people who can help you out,
Yeah, but like with a librarian like your mom, it shows how structured metadata has gone back to the 19th century with, was it Melville Dewey? Was that of Dewey Decimal fame? I think that was his first name.
Yeah.
But people were working out structured metadata as a way to navigate the data, over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And we can take advantage of those things and other things like them.
It's like there's so much out there, and we're just things that were created 100 years ago still have utility today, and perhaps are underutilized. So
I never checked. I think I'll have to do a search after we're later today. There must be someone must have put together a SCOS representation of the Dewey Decimal System. I mean, I know the Dewey's kind of outmoded and people use Library of Congress more now, which is also available in SCOS. That can be downloaded from Library of Congress. But the Dewey Decimal one in SCOS, that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. Well, are there other things we need to talk about today? Other related topics that you wanted to cover before we sign off today?
No, I got to talk about, Robert Johnson and generating music and lots of fun stuff, and as well as this technology, a lot of it, which that's why I had a blog. It was fun just to play with it, and it was, sort of a dream come true to end up as to have a full-time job at a company making some of the better products in that area. That was also free, by the way. That I always made it a point on my blog. I didn't write about commercial software, but stuff that was free, and GraphWise had and still has a free version of GraphDB for people to play with and to try a lot of these technologies.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, bobdc.com is your blog site.
Yeah, /blog there, or you see more about music activities and things like that.
Yeah. So real fun site to read, and Bob, I appreciate the time so much today.
Thank you for inviting me. I love spouting off opinions.
Obviously, and it's really helpful that you just help us sort of think through some of these issues today. So appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Bye-bye now. I'm going to stop the recording.